Today's video is about encouraging you to step outside the ordinary. We are shooting creative maternity with gels and the star filter. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. I have always encouraged people to step outside of the ordinary, to try something different with their portraits. In fact, my second book was about adding a little bit of a fashion flair to your portrait work. And I've taught many classes on stylized photography. And so today, I want to give you a demonstration of this with a creative maternity shoot. For so many years, maternity looked all the same. It really did. There was like a couple of looks. It was backlit, high-key black and white, or it was florals, or it was just a little bit of a floofing dress. And so it became kind of repetitive, but I strongly believe in exploring, trying something new, finding your own style, and stepping outside of what everyone else is doing. And so today I'm going to shoot maternity in my style, with my own interpretation, using gels and a star filter. Now, when I do a fashion shoot, I'm putting together so many different elements, creative styling, unusual lighting, bold post-processing and saturated colors. So why wouldn't I give the same treatment to my portrait subjects? That's exactly what I do. Everybody gets the same fashion photography treatment, whether it is going to be a maternity shoot, a high school senior, or a fashion editorial for a major magazine. All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to combine two of my favorite techniques. I'm going to use saturated color gel photography and hard light with a star filter. So all of that together is going to give an image that is creative, unexpected, and looks very much like me, even though it is of a maternity subject. So what we're going to do is I'm going to build in each light step by step so you can see how it's contributing to the final photo, and then we'll do a little bit of color grading so you can see how I bring it all together in post-processing. The strobes that I'm using today are a mixture of Pro Photo D2s and Pro D3s. Our very first light has no modifier at all. It's over here to the left-hand side, and this is a bare strobe, no modifier with a blue gel. Now, the reason that I've selected no modifier is because I want to use the hard light for two reasons. Reason number one is that when I'm using gels, a hard light often makes the color look even more saturated, even poppier. That's the first reason. But the second reason is that she's wearing a sparkly dress. And later on, when I add a filter, having hard light is going to be essential in order to get a creative in-camera technique. So let's take a look at what my first gel is doing to illuminate my subject. All right, so you can see that this is already giving me something that looks a little bit in my style. It's hard light, so she has that beautiful sculptural shape to the side of her face, and then the saturated blue everywhere in the shot. You'll notice that there's not a shadow on the background, and that's because we have placed our main light further off to the left-hand side, so the shadow is being cast out of my frame. The background that I'm using here is a Savage Universal Fashion Gray. This is my favorite background choice when I'm using gels because it absorbs light well, it reflects it well, and it's really easy to gel and change colors. Now, if you want to learn more about using gels, I have a class called The Magic of Gels. It goes extremely in-depth into things like color theory, what modifiers to use, combinations of colors, many different setups that you can use for everything from beauty shots, fashion shots, creative portraits, and more. Okay, so we had our first light, but right now, it's not really drawing attention to the outlines of her body. This is a maternity session, and I feel like the fact that she's pregnant kind of falls to the background, like you don't really notice it. And so what I want to do is add some rim lights. The rim lights are going to contour her body, draw attention to the curves. And so for this set, I've added two more strobes behind the subject with 1x4 foot strip softboxes and grids. This is my go-to choice of modifier when I'm looking for rim lights because it gives even illumination on the side of the subjects. And the grid is going to be really important because it controls the spill of light. It helps reduce lens flare. This will become really important when we add a filter later on. Now, because I want this to be all about color, I could go with white light and leave it as is, but I want to introduce another layer of interest. So on those two strobes, I've added magenta gels. Now, by the way, the gels that I've selected here are not color correction gels. So for example, there are different gels that are blue or orange to make something appear daylight or tungsten. There's also green and magenta gels to help color correct. That's not what these are. These are actually what's affectionately called party gels. These are super saturated, give you bold color. The gels that I'm using here are from the Roscoe Color Effects Kit. All right, so let's turn on those back two lights. instantly this image becomes much more refined. It has more depth. You're paying attention to the contours of her body. The color's interesting. It is a much stronger photograph, in my opinion. Now, I like what the colors look like, and I may add a little bit more to this shot, but I do think I could pump them up, make them look more saturated in post. I do not consider post-processing cheating. I'm achieving a lot of it in camera, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make those colors look even more bold with how I process the file, which is why I shoot tethered. For today's shoot, I'm shooting tethered using a Tether Tools tether cable, a tether block, and I'm shooting into Capture One. Now, the reason that I do this is as I'm shooting, I go in and I play around with the files. I pop the contrast, the saturation, white balance. I play around with the colors and the shadows, midtones, and highlights. As I play around with those colors, each image that I take will come in and have that effect applied. The reason I love this is I can see in real time if I'm getting from the raw file what I need for the end photo. Maybe I need to add more fill light or choose a more saturated gel. I can see it in real time. So let's actually pop over and I'm going to show you what I would do for a little bit of color grading. To begin with, I often start by adding a little bit of contrast and a little saturation when I am using gels. And already, just to see the before after there, it's made the color pop that much more. Now, because there's not white light in the image, I can actually really manipulate the colors and I could pop the saturation to 100% without it making the skin tone look weird because there is no skin tone. This is a benefit of a setup like this where there's not a neutral light anywhere in the scene or on the subject's face. So far so good. Now I probably do want to add a little bit of clarity for some extra pop. And then if I want to refine those colors even more, I can come into both the color editor and color balance. So for example, I could go into the magentas here. I could pump up the saturation or darken them down a little bit if I want them to appear even richer. I could also go into the blues and I could make them appear more cyan or a little bit more purple based on where I am dragging the hue. In this case, what I think is I'll darken them slightly, saturate it slightly, and I can probably back off my original saturation just a little bit. So here's the before and after if I want color that is really jumping off the page. There's nothing subtle about this, but it very much fits my style. Now I'm going to start there for my color grade, but of course, because I'm working with raw files and I'm shooting tethered, I can keep tweaking it along the way. So I'm looking at this and I think there's one or two more things I could add to improve this image. All right, so far I'm using 3 strobes, and honestly I think that could be enough. But I want to add one more for a little bit more depth and to draw a little bit more attention to the shape of her body, to the belly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a 4th and final strobe with a grid pointed at the background behind my subject. What that's going to do is going to create a little glow of light, which is going to basically point the eye to look at the middle of the frame, look at her stomach. Now, on this grid, because I don't want it to be too distracting, I want it to match the color theory, the color harmonies in the image, we're going to add a magenta gel. So let's turn on that 4th light and take a look. All right, so you can see what the grid is adding to this equation, just a glow of a subtle pink purple behind her. Now, by the way, the reason this appears purple, even though we were using a magenta gel, is because the blue of our main light is mixing with that magenta and that's giving it that purple look. I don't mind it too much because it's giving us an analogous color scheme. So we have our blue, our purple, our magenta. But if I wanted it to be even more saturated, you know what? I could probably go ahead and isolate that in post and make it a rich magenta. So the lighting looks good so far. And you can see the glow in the background is covering most of the middle of the frame. If I wanted it to be a tighter area of light, I could switch out for a tighter grid. Now, if grids are new to you, I have many different YouTube videos that talk about grids and how you can choose the right grid. In fact, I have an entire video called Grids Totally Changed My Photography you can check out, and I have a link to that in the description below. I also have a tutorial called Master Studio Lighting that talks about controlling light. I talk about gels, but I also go in depth on grids. So my point is, on this, if you didn't like that coverage of the magenta, you wanted it to be a little bit more restrictive, you could switch over to a smaller grid. The grid that I'm using here is a 10-degree grid. For these ProPhoto strobes, they actually make grids that fit directly onto the front of the monolights, and they come in 20 degree, 10 degree, and 5 degree. So I could switch from the 10 I'm using here to a 5 if I wanted a tighter area of light. All right, but I'm happy with this so far. So the next piece of the equation, just to make this a little bit extra and to play off of the sparkles of the dress, is I'm going to add a filter. The filter I'm adding is a 4-point star filter. This is my go-to when I want a lot of starburst effects. And what it's going to do is going to take the hard main light that is reflecting off of the sparkles on the dress, and anywhere it gets a direct reflection, it's going to create a starburst effect. And so this is going to give us a little bit of a disco glamour effect to this shot. So I'm going to add that star filter. Let's take a look. I find that when I add creative filters, it adds a little bit of an additional element of fantasy. Already using the gels and the super saturated colors makes this a fantasy image, but the star filter sells that even more. It feels to me more like a music video. So we have a total of 4 lights, 4 gels, and a star filter to give us this effect. But the end result, and trying to get that beautiful image, is going to be a combination of my camera angle as well as the subject's pose. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some shots of the subject, and I think some of the shots will be in total profile, looking off into the distance. That's really going to play up the shape of her form. Now, the camera and lens that I'm using today is the Canon R5 and the Canon RF 24-105. That is my go-to camera and lens combo. It is razor sharp and it allows me to have a lot of flexibility with my crop. So with that, let's go get the shot. All right, so that is a bold, colorful, creative maternity image. So if you want to be different, then do it. Create images that are unlike anyone else, because if somebody is attracted to that style, then they need to hire you to achieve that effect. Plus, it helps you stand out from the crowd. All right, guys, so if you want to see the gear used to make these images, be sure to check out the links in the description below and visit adorama.com. And don't forget, not only do I have tutorials on learnwithlindsay.com, but I also have several different tutorials that show you how I use star filters and gels and other creative techniques right here on Adorama's YouTube. So be sure to like and subscribe. See you next time, guys.